to the float pull-up Moses cone, so kind of doing a little bit of everything in nursing. It's kind of fun. I get to call in at like 6:30 in the morning and figure out where I'm going to work for the day. So it's testing of skills and all that kind of stuff. So that has been a blast. I know there's several things Anne wanted me to talk to you guys about. What kinds of things are you interested in knowing for those of you who wanted to go to nursing school, if any of you are present?
How is it balancing life and school? And because I know like accelerated program is faster and there's more. So.
Yep. So most of the accelerated programs are about a year and a half, and you're right. There's no break like in the summer or any sorts of things like that. So it was a lot. Definitely couldn't work or do anything like that during the ABSN program. I would spend, there was at least 2 days a week that were class like 8 to 5, 9 to 5, and then the other days of the week were open for them to schedule clinicals for you, where you went with their clinical group or you were going with your preceptor. So it was definitely busy and fast paced. There was really no lull, so things were moving. And then you had multiple courses. Like I think we were taking like 4 or 5 courses at a time. So definitely there wasn't a lot of room for extracurricular activities. It was pretty stressful, but it was over quickly, so that's the nice part about it. But I also know, checked on this before I came because I didn't want to give you guys false information. So working at UNC, I had several people that I worked with as CNAs who ended up going back to nursing school. And they elected, instead of doing the ABSN programs, to jump into the traditional program with the undergraduate students. So you can elect to do that. I know at UNC and at UNC-G. And then the UNC-G, there's just 2 courses that if you were going to start in the fall, they make you take in the summer to like get you caught up to where those students are. And then you would jump in with them and you would do it over 2 years, like the undergraduates junior and senior year. And then that's more of like a reasonable pace. You have the summer off where you do like just an externship, but you're not doing class. Or if you're doing a class, it's like one online class and it's manageable. So if that's another way to do it and get your bachelor's right away, but not have to do the like fast-paced, more stressful route. Nursing school is not going to be not stressful, but
yeah. How would your like average day go with like homework, studying, classes, what time like you went to bed kind of thing?
Really depended on the day. Definitely had to learn not to procrastinate. I got away with that for a long time. And then kind of had to plan things out. So the nice part is most of my professors will put up what they've got for us for the entire semester from the start. And so you just kind of have to start looking ahead and realizing like, okay, I might have 2 tests on the same day, like, and planning ahead. But usually there were definitely days where I went to clinic and then came back and still had homework to do. And I was in the clinic or in the hospital from like 7 to 7. And then, you know, it was a late night and I was up again and then the next morning for class. Classes were usually, I don't think we ever started at 8, so it was like 8:39 to like 4 or 5. But usually required homework and stuff after that once I got home. So they were definitely long days. But I mean, I was able, one of my goals through was to kind of have like 1 day a week to not do much for school or to do minimal stuff. And I was, for the most part, able. Now there were some weeks where I really didn't feel good about a test or whatever, and I probably should have been studying. So I did that instead. But for the most part, that was an okay thing. And I know now, like if you're looking at, like you guys are looking at applying and stuff for nursing school, a lot of the people that I've worked with that have like gone through that process, they've stopped doing interviews for a lot of the BSN programs. So you really just have to make yourself look good on paper. One of the biggest things I would say that I wish I had done that I didn't do is to get some experience beforehand. I'd worked in like some clinics, like following and shadowing and stuff, but getting like my hands on some patients and talking to patients, because it's really awkward when you go into the first time into a patient's room and you're introducing yourself and like trying to make a connection with them, and they're a complete stranger. It's more uncomfortable than you would imagine. So just getting used to like sitting down, asking people questions, because as a nurse you usually pry into things that people don't usually share. So just getting comfortable asking difficult questions and sometimes that means, like, I remember practicing on friends and family members. One of the parts that we definitely struggled with in graduate school now, but also in undergrad nursing school, is like a sexual history. And so just practicing and talking to your friends and stuff through difficult questions that you have to ask was helpful.
What are some things you think you did on your application? Did you have to interview when you were?
I did have to interview.
Okay. What are some things that, besides getting experience, that you think are going to distinguish you if you're applying to a program that doesn't interview?
Yeah, I would think your personal statement's going to need to be strong, because that's really the only. Looking back at like my application and then my graduate school application, the personal statement was really the only opportunity you had to tell them about yourself. And especially if they're not going to see you face to face and you would be able to like portray who you are, you're going to want that personal statement to be really good. So I remember with my Duke application, I read that personal statement in this class. And then Anne had looked over it several times, but then I'd also gotten, I'd done an internship, which I'll say was the best thing because I came into this thinking I wanted to be a physical therapist. So that was helpful. So I used the lady that I interned with to like read over and give me feedback because she was a nurse, and so like, are the things I'm saying totally obscure to why I want to do this? So she gave me good feedback, and then Craig Albacher read it I think several times as well, and everybody just kind of tweaked until we all felt comfortable with it. So definitely don't be afraid to get criticized. It's much better to get criticized beforehand than to turn in an application that's not prepared, because a lot of people are going to be applying with you, so you want to make sure that you stand out. Let's see, what else did I do? I would say experience, just knowing your why. So why you want to do it and why you think you'd be good at it and why they should choose you. Those are some big questions that throughout every application or every process I went through, they always ask me, and even for jobs, like why? Why are you here? Like, why should I hire you over someone else? That kind of thing was helpful. And the interview, I mean, that was a great, if you do get an interview opportunity, then you're lucky because that's a time to like shine. And you can let your personality come out. You can make them like remember your face. And preparing for that, I think we did mock interviews in here.
We had somebody from career development come and talk about interviewing, but you could do a mock interview with career development or guided discovery, which is what it is, integrated career advising.
Mock interview, because when I was in this class, I knew I had the interview coming up in the summer, so I went ahead and did like all that stuff, and then I think I even sat down maybe with Craig or some other people and had them like fire questions at me and see and give feedback on that kind of thing. And I've also found it helpful since like applying to jobs. So nursing school nursing has always loved to ask you situational questions. So like, what would you do in blank situation, as opposed to like what are your strengths or weaknesses? They like to see that come out in like an example of something that you've done. So like, tell me about a time when you had a difficult patient, like how did you handle them, or a difficult coworker, those types of things where it's like situational interview questions. They love those. And I think from my experience talking to a lot of my friends who've gone into other programs that have been the same, like PT, OT, they want to put you on the spot. So I find it helpful to, you can look up like the Google like situational interview questions, and I usually just copy those over to a Word document and then have some ideas of things I would answer to those questions, because it's really tough when you've got like a room, like a panel full of people looking at you and they're like, tell me this, and you're like having to think of like a time when you were mad at someone and how you handled it. So I always try and have like a couple of stories at the top of my head that I can pull up and say, oh yeah, this applies to that, and because it's much easier to think about it a couple weeks ahead of time instead of when you're sitting in a room in front of them.
How was it studying for the test towards the end, or when did you start during your program setting?
The NCLEX?
Yes.
Oh good, now I finally know how to say that properly. I thought it was NCLEX, but
Yeah, NCLEX.
which stands for?
National Certification Licensure Exam.
That's somebody was coming in here, but no.
So So you start from the first semester. Most of the schools have like a program that they bought into. It's like a preparatory program, and it depends on your school which one. So mine was ATI, and it's just like a version of it. And so every semester, like when we took peds or when we took adult or whatever, there was like a NCLEX practice question test that just focused on that section. And so at the end of the semester, we would take that test. And then towards the end of the whole thing, we took like a benchmark test that essentially was like a practice NCLEX, a shortened version. And just kind of gave us like, if we took the NCLEX today, our percentage of passing. And then at the very end of, like once classes were over and there was like a week between when we graduated, they had the ATI people come in and do a review course with us. And it was like 2-3 days of like intense review over the whole test and like test taking strategies and all that kind of stuff. I probably am in my head, but I don't think I'm a good standardized test taker. And so I was super nervous about having to sit down and do that, especially after doing all the nursing school stuff. I was like, crap, I need to pass this thing. So I did a Kaplan review, which is like one of the top rated review programs, and it was like an online course for a week, and it was really helpful to have someone help you like work through the questions, because the NCLEX questions are different than any other question. Like it's a bunch of negatives, and so it's like trying to manipulate the question as like what exactly they're wanting, because there's like 3 answers that are right, but like what's the most right one. So just learning how to take the test is the biggest part of it. But I know that that has been true for my friends like in PT school, PA school, med school. There's usually like they bring in, the school doesn't want you to not pass, so they bring in these programs to like help you through each phase, and then usually there's like a review week or session or whatever that they pay for, that you sit, they come to your school, they work through all of it with you, give you some help, and then try and set you up to be as most successful as you can on the boards. They don't want you to fail, makes them look bad.
Can you talk about why are you doing the DNP program? How does that change what you can do as a nurse?
Yeah. So as a nurse, I cannot do any prescribing. I don't have any prescribing capabilities. I can do assessments, I can make recommendations, and all of that stuff, but I can't do any prescribing. So with the DNP, or they still have the MSN option, and right now nursing is still trying to figure out. We're still trying to figure out the difference, really. If you wanted to, the DNP really sets you up to open up the option to go back into education and teach at the higher level if you ever wanted to. But as far as clinical practice, it doesn't change your pay or anything like that yet. But I figured I was young enough that I probably should just go ahead and do it. And that's why I did it. But it really kind of, it's the same essentially as a physician assistant, except I have to have been a nurse and have to have experience as a nurse prior to going back to be a nurse practitioner. Whereas I'm sure you guys know with a PA, you don't necessarily have to have any medical experience. You can be an English major if you wanted to and go to PA school.
Well,
So,
no, you have to have like thousands of hours
yes.
of experience before.
But you don't have to be like a nurse and like work
Right.
in clinical practice.
That's true. True.
But as far as the difference between the two of us, there's not at this point much different. A lot of the PAs I know work in the office with the MD. I can practice in a different setting. There's just technically someone who's supposed to look over my notes before they get officially signed off. But usually once you've built that rapport, it's more of a formality than they're not really changing the way you care for your patient, as long as they trust you. And I'm sure that's the same way with the PAs too. They just kind of have, you pretty much have autonomy, but not legally.
Well, aren't nurses or like nurse practitioners are called independent practitioners versus a PA is a dependent practitioner?
Yes.
Right, yeah.
And then like in North Carolina, I don't know if any of you are paying attention, but right now, but it's in the legislature for us that nurse practitioners get autonomy. So that would mean that we wouldn't need a supervising physician, and that's really to help combat the shortage of healthcare providers in rural areas, because nurse practitioners are really meant to help serve the primary care population, and to improve and prevent health outcomes. And so they're trying to give us autonomy, which they've done in many other states, but essentially we can practice totally independent of a provider. So, which will likely, we have the strong medical association, so I don't know that it'll happen this first time, but I foresee over my career that'll be a change. But it is kind of nice because I can collaborate with a physician over the phone or in the office. They're required to talk to me, so it's part of their job if I have questions. I think you'd asked me to talk about a little bit of like how the interdisciplinary care team works.
Yes, I was getting ready to ask that.
Yep. So I haven't quite figured out cone yet because I'm new and then I'm all over the place, so it's tough to see how the different disciplines do it. But the way we did it at Carolina was, it was expected as the RN that you participated in rounds with your medical team, because you would have residents, students, medical students, and then attending physicians who are rounding on your patient. And so you were the person who was with them all day, every day, saw them in physical therapy, saw how they took their meds, how they're bound, like you knew everything. And so it was expected that you participate and advocate for your patient. And so usually we would participate in medical rounds with them. And then I could be the liaison at that point with any concerns that we had. And then later in the morning after they finished rounding on their patients, we would do what we call cap rounds. And so essentially it's like a big conference room. We all sit around the table and every nurse shares on their patient. And then you would discuss, so one of the biggest things is hospitals are now, because of the Affordable Care Act, getting financial, they're getting hit financially, not getting reimbursed as much if people are readmitted to the hospital for the same reason they went to the hospital initially. Because we have too many sick people in the hospital, so we'd like to keep you healthy and out of it. And so we would sit and then have a discussion. It was the nurse, there was usually a resident from each team each medical team that had a patient on our floor. There was always a case manager / social worker. They will be your best friend for any discipline you go into. Physical therapy, usually tried to stop by. We didn't have, in the medical ICU, we didn't have a ton of like critical occupational health needs or speech language needs. Those were usually communicated like through the nurse to the team. Who else would be? And the charge nurse was always there for every single patient. But essentially it helped with communication between all parts, because you can imagine if everyone just focused on their specialty and didn't discuss with each other what was going on, we really are delaying like how long that patient's in the hospital. And the longer the patient's in the hospital, the more behind they are, especially with age, increased age. So it was helping, so I would come in and say like my barriers for my patient to discharge, like why are they still in the hospital, why do they still need this level of care, that kind of thing. And then everybody else would give their input. So if the patient was fluid overloaded, the physician would say their plan as to how they're working on that. The case management would set up home health, discuss like, that's the time where we discuss, is palliative hospice a concern? Is it something we should start having conversations with the family? It was just like a time for us all to sit down and talk to each other, because it just works more efficiently that way. What do you guys mostly want to do as a group? PT? That's usually the number one choice.
But there are several people in here that do want to go into nursing, so yes. So
I'm hoping to be midway, so I gotta do Accelerated BSN.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think someone in my class did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked with several people who've done that. Cool. Have you? So a lot of them. Have you done a doula?
I've met a few, and I haven't done the training myself, but I'm hoping to.
Okay.
At some point.
So there were several girls in my undergrad nursing class who wanted to do midwifery, and so they did the doula program. I think paid for it, or like offered it for free at some point during the program.
During the
undergrad, they came on like
BSN.
a weekend. Yeah, they came like on the weekend and got it done.
Okay.
And then had to go. You have to get hours, like get someone willing to help you or let you do it.
Yeah.
And so then they finished up their hours. But one of our professors was like certified to teach it, so they offered it on the weekend.
Oh, that's really cool.
And so they all got to do that, and then had that on their application, and then went into labor and delivery.
Cool.
So
Have you worked in labor and delivery at all?
I have not. I actually enjoy that clinical though a lot more than I expected to.
Yeah.
I was a little like, I'm not really sure what to expect here. Made me terrified to have a child, but outside of that, no, it was great. I was at Big Duke for that one. So they have like a triage, so like a maternity ED essentially. So people can like walk in and say, hey, I'm having cramps, like contractions like every so often, like, or I haven't felt my baby's heartbeat or whatever. And so they will triage them there and then send them out. And so we got to do triage, we got to do like the OR, so C-sections, emergency C-sections, all that stuff. That was really fun. We got to do labor and delivery on the floor, and then we got to do other babies, so like postpartum, and then we even got to spend time in the NICU. And so it was neat to see all the different parts of that.
That's like, yeah, exactly what I've been like doing shadowing this semester.
Yes. Yes, it is the happiest place in the hospital, except on the bad days, and then it's a really bad place to be. But most days I'm really happy. So that was fun. It was nice because everybody else can be kind of sad. So it's always like, oh, here's your baby. Like I was like, oh yay, I get to help you just really good. So yeah, that was fun. That was fun.
Do you think that there are aspects of like the nursing profession that you're going to miss after you do NP?
No, because once you're a nurse, you will always be a nurse first. So I think that I will say, so I'm not going to be able to, in the provider role, get to know my patients as well as like when I worked at the bedside, and I was in critical care. So like we would have the same patients. We even had some for like 2 years that we just couldn't place because they're on a ventilator or those types of things. And so you become a part of their family, and people are really vulnerable when they're sick, and we're the most trusted profession, and so they usually open up to us pretty quickly and pretty easily. And so you really connect with people on many levels, and then you get to help them through this process, and they are so thankful. And so that part, being in primary care, which is like where I'll get to build relationships and like know them over time. But sometimes it's hard in the way that medicine's going. Like we're given like 15 to 30 minute appointments to really like sit and talk with them and to get to know them. And then you see them like if they're healthy twice a year, once a year. So it's tougher to build that relationship with them, unlike you get to do it at bedside. So I will miss that part. But as far as the training and stuff, I don't think it ever goes away. Like it doesn't turn off. You're just adding more skills to what you've already learned.
Can you define, just maybe I'm the only one, can you define, I think I have a vague idea, critical care, what does that mean? What kind of setting is that?
Yeah. So critical care is like ICU and then like step down units. So you're taking patients on ventilators or patients who have drips that are managing their blood pressure, their heart rate, that are managing like how much fluid they're putting off. You can do continuous, it's called CRRT, continuous renal replacement therapy. So it's like dialysis, but it's going continuously. So instead of like, you send someone to dialysis 3 times a week and they get 3 liters taken off in 3 hours, you're doing it like over a 24-hour period. So more like simulating the renal function. Then we have all sorts of cool other things like ECMO, and that's where you're like a machine pumps the heart, like takes the blood from the heart and like oxygenates it and then puts it back in the heart, all like while their chest is open, and it's like fascinating. All sorts of cool stuff.
Unless you're the person with your chest open.
Huh?
I'm joking.
Mine?
I'm saying unless you're the person with the chest open,
yeah.
then it's not fascinating.
Well, you're not really aware that that's happening, thankfully. But no, there's just so many different parts, and I would say that's like. So being in nursing, like you were prepared as a generalist nurse. So when you come out, you feel like you know a lot of nothing. Like I know a lot, but like I don't know anything kind of thing. And I would say that's probably the same way for everybody I've known who's gone on to grad school. You're like, oh yeah, I know a lot of stuff, but like I still don't, there's still so much I need to know. And so I did a residency program, which I would highly recommend if you're thinking about doing it. And so I spent, Carolina, it was over a year long, and we would go once a month for like additional classes. So depending on what your specialty was, like if you were critical care, there was like a group of us who were first year nurses and we're in critical care. We were in class together every month, and the class focused on like our patient population. and how to better care for them. And so it essentially took like the knowledge you learned in nursing school and like went above and like made it specific to that. And then I don't remember if there was one for labor delivery, but there was one for general medicine, there was OR, pretty much every specialty that you can think of, there was one. And you would do it for a year, and it was classes, and definitely got annoying at times because you thought you were done with school and you're still doing stuff. But you got paid doing a class at that point, so that was great. And you had access to these modules that you could look things back up if you needed to, and nothing was like graded, but it was hopefully to help like enhance your knowledge. And then they also had like a support group that would meet once a month, and it was like all brand new nurses, and we would discuss like the challenges that we're having and like help each other work through. So one of the things I noticed as like a new nurse is how to get the respect of your nursing assistants. And then for like medical students, it'd be like how to get the respect of like the nurse. So that way you have this like camaraderie where like I can delegate you a task and you don't just like blow me off or like don't listen to me. Like how do you get their respect kind of thing. So we would kind of go through those challenges together and discuss stuff in ways that worked for other people and that kind of thing. And so that was helpful for sure to have support from other people who were dealing with the same challenges.
I have two questions. So I want to go into be a trauma nurse, and I'm
Like trauma ICU?
I'm sorry.
Trauma ICU?
Emergency room more so.
Okay.
But I was wondering, like, how did your shifts at work go? Like, how often did you work during the week? And if you had a relationship during the accelerated program, or how did you make relationship work, or did it affect it?
All right, so first question, shifts during the week. For nursing school or as a nurse?
As a nurse.
So as a nurse, I trained for 3 months. And depending, I think ED you train for 6. Because they want you, if you're working in the ED, they want you to be trained in peds and adults, so you can help wherever. And then you rotate. So you might be, as a new nurse, they're probably not going to put you in the trauma right away, but you might be doing triage, caring for patients that need an ICU bed but don't have one yet, and then there's trauma, and then all that applicable on the peds side. I started with 3 months of orientation on my unit, and then it was usually during the day because most of the senior nurses don't want to work nights. So it was on the day, and then we had to do, I think, 1 week of nights with them. And then once I was off, usually as a new nurse, most nurses now are hired as rotating, so technically you can work either shift. And as a new nurse, you don't get, being in the low seniority on the nursing pool, you don't get first choice on shifts. And so I worked nights predominantly for the first year and a half. And then I had enough seniority to transition into a day shift role.
How do you gain seniority?
Time.
Okay.
Time. Yeah. You have to pay your fees. And it kind of depends. So the ED, I think some of them still offer like, they have like X amount of jobs on day, so they might post a day only position. Or sometimes you'll work funky shifts too, like 7 to 7 is the traditional nursing shift, but in the ED you can work a 9 to 9, an 11 to 11, a 1 to 1, or a 2 to 2. So you kind of get stuck in the beginning with whatever they have open, and you're just like, I'm thankful to be working in the department I want to be in. And then as time goes on, you'll get it to where you want it to be. And then there's usually like a weekend requirement. And you'll probably always work your first Christmas because you're at the bottom of the totem pole. But after that, it's not that bad. Yeah. And then your second question was
If you had a relationship.
I did. It was at times difficult. There was, our summer semester was pretty hellacious actually, and that was the only time where I went like a month without seeing him. But usually every weekend, every other weekend, and towards the end, towards the end you go with like a nurse one-on-one, and you're in the department you want to be in. So your last semester you kind of get to choose like what am I interested in, and you can kind of focus. And so mine, though, I drew an unlucky preceptor who only worked weekend nights. So I worked every Saturday, Sunday night. So I had time during the week. And so there's usually a little give and take. It might not be ideal, but you'll have some time. Paying for it.
Yes, that was going to say. So we've had, you might remember, the folks from Wake Forest came and talked about paying for all this, and it blew your hair back, right? Fair? Okay. So you know, I don't know. One of the things that I was going to just paying for it in general, but I know that for graduate programs that you can borrow. You know, they talked about being able to borrow up to cost of attendance. Is the same thing true for an accelerated BSN program, and what are some ways to pay that back?
I do not know.
Okay.
Borrowing.
Okay. So how did you finance your, if we may ask, your Duke education?
I was lucky enough that I had gotten a lot of scholarship here, and graduated early. So whatever was left in my college fund went that way. So I didn't have a ton outside of that. Trying to think of what Duke is tough to pay for because it's expensive. It is probably now, after talking to a girl I just precepted last fall, I think it's running for the ABSN program like $100K, which is a lot. So the professors that I had say that they have students that find ways to pay for the whole thing.
And they break no laws, right?
Yeah.
With their payment.
But it takes a lot of initiative on the student part if you're going to pay for that much. So I can tell you about my experience from graduate school, and then like from my experience with people I've worked with. I had graduate school was my ticket, so I was trying to minimize the cost of it, and so I actually had it all covered. But it does take like some give and take. So there's what's called the FELS grant, which is Federal Education Loans, and it applies to many of you actually, because it is for any underserved career in North Carolina. So I know nurses are for sure on there. I think occupational therapy is on there.
Pretty much all the PT, everything
Social
is on
work,
there.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of stuff is on there. And it is, they provide you like, the higher up you're going for a degree, the more money they'll give you. So, but I think for an undergraduate nursing program, for like a junior, senior year, which is what you would be considered in an ABSN, it's like $7,000 a year, $7,500 a year. So at a state school, that's pretty much going to cover you, because they're not going to just stay on campus as a second degree student. So that's going to cover your tuition for the most part. And then for an MSN or a master's, it's like $10,000, and then for a doctoral program, it's like $15,000 a year that they give you. So the way you pay back is that you have to be willing to work in the state of North Carolina for however many years you took the loan. So I didn't get it my first year, but I've gotten it my second, and now that I've gotten it, I'll get it my third. So I'll have to give 2 years of service in the state of North Carolina. You can work it anywhere. There's no restriction on the population that you're serving, none of that stuff. And they just recently changed it. So it used to be that like every December 1st, the application opened, and like it was a mad dash to whoever could get it in first, because it was first come, first served. And I think the first year I turned it in like December 1st at like 9 a.m. and I was too late. So now though, it is just a lottery. So you apply between December and March, and it's just a matter of you're getting lucky enough that your name gets drawn. And once you've gotten it, as long as you maintain the criteria for grades, you get it every year. So that's nice. The other way, so UNC-G, I know, offers a ton of, because their nursing program is so big, they offer so many scholarships. And it is a simple, like, they just simplified the application process. It's like 2 clicks and your stuff is in. And you're considered for like everything on there. And then the other option that I know a lot of people that I work with at Chapel Hill do is hospital reimbursement. So depending on how like fast you're needing to accelerate through the process, I've worked with several people who work as CNAs in the hospital. And if you work at Most of the hospitals in this area are gonna give you somewhere between, like for part-time to full-time, it's a different rate. But they'll give you up to like $5,000 a year to put towards your education. And it's just like basically like, thank you for working for us and like advancing your knowledge. Chapel Hill was a little different because it's the state hospital. So technically, if you work there, you're a state employee. And so as a state employee, you have additional benefits. So I know they offer like, they will waive 9 credit hours a year. They just say, no questions asked, we'll give you 3 classes.
That's at UNC Chapel
That's
Hill?
at UNC Chapel Hill.
Okay.
And then they also will they reimburse up to a certain amount. And so I have worked with CNAs who are doing it part-time and in med school. I have worked with CNAs who have worked full-time and they worked every weekend through nursing school, but they left with no debt. So depending on the sacrifice that you're willing to make, that is an option. And then Duke, I'm a little bitter about it because they told me after, so the way they used to do it is when you got in, and this is when I applied and everything, they were like, if you go to work for Duke University Hospital, we will give you $20,000 over the course of 2 to 3 years. I think it's 3 years, towards your education. Like we'll strike it off for your commitment to work for us. But then my class came along, we got admitted, and they were like, just kidding, we're revoking that. And so we were a little devastated. But then they have restarted it since. So I know they do that, and it's like, maybe I think it's like 25. But it's a commitment over like 3 years. You have to work for the Duke system.
After you graduate.
After you graduate. So that would be an option to look at. I can't think of any, Chapel Hill doesn't offer you that. I know, and then I can't think of any of the local hospitals here that do like a post, like we'll give you this money back after you've completed, but if you're working for them during the process, then it will give you money.
Okay. And then in all the stuff that Ellen Montgomery talked about, like National Health Service Corps and things like that.
Yes, and there are other, like I went to school with several people who took different options and they agreed to work in like certain rural parts of the state if they got some scholarship money. I actually went to nursing school with a girl who enlisted in the Navy, and she's committed now. Her whole Duke education is completely paid for as long as she gave like 4 years of service, and she's actually signed on for more. So I know I've worked with several girls who they've had friends who did the Navy. Their significant other did the Navy for med school, and it's all covered as long as they commit to service. So there are options.
I had a question about the thing that you said is feds.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens, so say I go to PT school for 3 years and I get that grant. So what happens if I don't work in North Carolina?
You pay back
Okay.
the money you took.
So it's like, you work in North Carolina and you don't have to pay what, just a lot of money, and then if you do, it's just like a regular loan.
But can't you do it like the 3 years at any time? It doesn't have to be like right after you graduate, right?
I think there's a time limit to like when to get your service in. So if you took 2 years, I think it's within 4 years, that kind of thing. But you can do like, so if you did 3 years, you got it for 3 years, you worked for 3 years, as soon as 3 years of one day, you can go wherever you want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know anyone that did nursing corps? Or have you heard of nursing corps?
I have, do I know of anyone who did? I cannot think of anyone from that. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about at the end. So how long did it take you to find a job after you got your BSN?
So that's the good news for any of you guys who are interested in going into nursing. We are currently like 1,000 RN short every day. So I had 4 job offers before I ever walked across the stage or passed any board exam. So you will be flooded with opportunities. And I don't know if I told Ann this too, but you, once you have like a year or 2 under your belt, even if, so like you want to go in labor and delivery, so that's a specialty. So sometimes those jobs like pediatrics and those are more difficult to get as a new graduate nurse. But once you have experience like 1 to 2 years of experience anywhere, you can literally do anything. I actually went to nursing school with a girl who was a lawyer first and came back to nursing school. We were all like, what are you doing? Because you know they're in practice in South Dakota. So we were like, this isn't making sense. But she is now a medical malpractice nurse and does that and gives like legal advice. And so reviews cases and that kind of thing. So there's literally anything that you can imagine you can do. So that's been the nice part. And there's many roles in the hospital that you can play outside of being an RN. So we have RNs that are case managers. So they work with more like a social worker and help navigate like a plan for the patient outside and their barriers and what's going to bring them back, that kind of thing. So there's many thinking options. Actually, I don't even remember Chad Wagner's mom. She's a nurse and she's actually a lactation consultant. She started out as a labor and delivery nurse and now works as a lactation consultant for the city of Greensboro. So she goes into underserved moms' homes and like helps them like get the resources and figure out how to maximize like their breastfeeding capabilities and that kind of stuff.
Do you know what the like training is? Like what's the process of becoming a lactation consultant?
I know she's in master's, but it's like in education, I think. And so she just took like an extra certification to do that. Yeah. But she functions independently and does like in-home visits and sees them.
Private?
Mm-hmm. She works for the city of Greensboro, but
Okay.
like she will just go to their house and like makes her schedule kind of thing. 8 Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So that's a different option too. There's literally everything you can think of you can do. So it's fun. A lot of people teach. Come back and teach undergraduate students, and you'll be asked to do that too as a nurse once you have a couple years of experience. And I recommend it because somebody did it for you and was willing to be frustrated and slow their day down and all that stuff. So it's fun to go back, and they usually teach you something, teach you more than you teach them. So that's always, and they usually, especially in critical care, you can sometimes feel like you're calloused a little bit because you see all these terrible things happen, and then they come in with this like fresh perspective and are so thankful to be there. So, and I would say that's true for everybody. Like once you're a professional, you're going to be asked to help mentor a student. And my experiences have always been positive. They're usually happy to be there because they love what they're doing and learning.
Can you talk a little bit about, do you have to, I know you're in a doctoral program now, but if you, once you get your doctorate, or if you just stay as a BSN, let's say, do you have to do any kind of continuing education as you go forward as a nurse?
Yeah.
So what kind of stuff do you have to do?
Yes, I'm trying to actually have to renew my license this year, and I didn't have to worry about it as much because I'm in school, so that counts for a lot of my CEs. But every 2 years, you will have to renew your RN license, and even when I become a nurse practitioner, I have to renew my RN license because I'm a nurse first. So it's usually on your birthday month at the end, and you do have a requirement of CEs. I did not have any trouble in my first time renewing because I'd done a residency program. So all those courses that we did the American Association of Critical Care Nurses like coursework because I was in critical care. So all those courses were CEs that applied. So if you're working in most of the hospitals, like Moses Cone, Wake Forest Baptist, like all of those do this too. Those were all applicable the first time around. But you can, usually the hospitals offer plenty of CEs throughout the year. If you're paying attention to your emails, they're free. They're being held in the hospital. And they can literally be on anything. Like anything you're interested in, if it's something that you're like, I haven't thought about that since nursing school, like, and it was kind of interesting then, you can go take a CE on that. It doesn't matter. So that is always interesting. And they have multiple ways that you can do it. So you can look it up on the North Carolina Board of Nursing, like the requirements for CEs or whatever, and it will tell you like all the different ways. So, like if you do an evidence-based practice project in your hospital, like that counts for so many hours. If you are teaching, that counts for something. If you have, so like I know now as a nurse, when I'm a nurse practitioner, like the people I work under currently get CE hours for having me. But as a nurse, you don't get CE hours for having a nursing student. Yeah, I But there are so many different ways to do it. Hospitals usually offer plenty of free things. It can get expensive if you like want to go to a conference, but a lot of times if it's something that you're involved with at the hospital and you just volunteer to like go represent them, they'll pay for it or reimburse you to go to a conference, and there's usually a lot of CEs there. So that's a good way to travel too.
What I does that CE also include doing something like acupuncture or dry needling?
With the CE included?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can pretty much do, so, or at least like when, as an NP, like as a nurse, it wouldn't, because that's not in my scope of practice. But like if it's within your scope and like something you could do and you're just doing like extra training on or to get certified, yeah, that usually counts.
So it doesn't have to be necessarily in your field.
It needs to be within your scope.
Oh, okay.
So something that you could perform. So like if you were a physician, then you could go do a course on that. It can't be outside of like what you're able to do with that licensure. So like for instance, I can do, as a nurse practitioner, I'll be able to do joint injections. So like in my program, they're not going to teach me that because there's only so many situations where that's applicable. So like if I was in ortho NP and I was like, well, I really want to enhance my skills on this, I could go, and that would count. Does that make sense?
I was going to ask you, you talked a little bit about how classes were different in grad school or in nursing school because you couldn't procrastinate quite as much and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about classes at Guilford that you think prepared you really well, or why, or maybe something you wish you had taken that you didn't take?
Are a lot of you exercise science majors? Yeah? So you know Craig, and you have taken the, or you will take the, is it the assessment course?
Yeah, physical exam and assessment, 474,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah, okay.
That was probably the ticket, because so a lot of, as you transition, you have to do a lot of dang checkoffs, because if you're gonna go touch someone and like make recommendations, we need to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So that can be super intimidating at first. When you're in a room one-on-one with the curtain pulled and like you're expected to go through this whole thing. So that was definitely helpful, and like doing a, what you call that, an oral test or like a performance test. We had a lot of those for like every skill check off. And I know my friends in PT school do it too. They do that same thing, except like more detailed the further they got along. So that was super helpful. What else was helpful? Anatomy and physiology was really important. That was a difficult class here. And that was challenging. But it was super helpful. And I had to retake, like once we like got into nursing school. So Duke's BSN is set up where they have like a master's course every semester. And so they made us retake patho, their version, nursing school applicable stuff. And it made a lot more sense the second time around. So, and then usually when we advance through like each of the different sections, and this is the same for like med school and stuff, you would go over the patho again for that disease process. So continually like going over it made it definitely like hit home more and more. But it became more critical to like actually understand it so that you understood what's happening to your patient, as opposed to like just taking the test on it and memorizing it. So just like talking through it. So I found that group study sessions and stuff were helpful in nursing school, which I did not really utilize in undergrad. What else? It was a lot of less assignments, more studying. Like, so my grades were usually based on a midterm and a final test. And then there was like 1 or 2 assignments in there to like help combat like if you got a bad grade, but a lot of it was testing. And from the very start of nursing school, they started with like NCLEX style questions, which was a slap in the face to start, but you were thankful for it by the end, because you started to understand how to answer them, and then once you got to NCLEX, you were thankful. And I know they do the same in all the other graduate school programs, they're gonna phrase their questions the way the board would phrase the questions. Because the more practice you have, the more successful you'll be. But that definitely stunk the first test. So don't be too disappointed.
Did they have tips on how to study or anybody to help you with that, or did you guys just have to figure it out for yourselves?
Yes and no. So I think it kind of depends on, so at Guilford, my experience was everybody was like willing to help you, and your professors were like really cared about you, and like if something wasn't going right, like they would stop you and say, hey, like something going on, like I noticed this, and that kind of thing. Whereas nursing school, and it might have been that I was at like a bigger school, but you had to make that first introduction. Like you had to ask for help. They kind of like it's kind of this way for other graduate school programs, not to like make you guys scared or anything, but there's a lot of people waiting for your spot. So you have to take initiative of yourself and your work, and really show that like you want to be there and you care. And there was a lot of tutoring services and stuff available for it, but you had to ask. You had to say like, hey, I want some help. I didn't do as well as I wanted to. So that was definitely a difference, is you had to take ownership. Whereas here I felt like opportunities were just like presented to me.
I'm trying not to re-ask you the same question, because that's what so yeah, I'm guessing that critical care is your favorite setting. Or I was going to ask, what was your favorite care setting and what was your least favorite care setting?
My favorite and least favorite.
And why?
And why?
Yes.
Let's see. I obviously enjoy critical care because that's where I chose to work. Because it was challenging and no two people were the same. And so I got to see a lot of invasive things done. I got to, as a new nurse, everybody's always like, oh, go learn. And so you get to go like sit down in procedures and like ask questions of all those different specialties too. And so that was really fun for me. There was a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and I got to look things, like trying to figure things out, because I was working with a lot of residents who also didn't know. So it was kind of fun to like be a part of the team and like collaborate together. And then my least favorite setting, I had to do, my pediatric rotation was on the pediatric oncology unit at Duke. And I really love kids, but I really don't like sick kids. And they were pretty sick kids. Or, like neglected, like you just wouldn't believe. And so that part was too heart-wrenching for me. I was like, I would rather love on you and like not have to see this whole thing. So I figured out pretty quickly that I didn't do sick kids. I'll do healthy kids. So that was the first one for me.
Did you apply to other nursing programs?
Undergraduate?
No, as for Accelerated BSN,
No.
yeah. You just applied to Duke.
Yeah, because I looked at several, but Duke was the only one. So like I said, I graduated in December and started in January. They were the only ones who were willing to let me apply without my degree being conferred first. So they were willing to say, as long as you send us your grades after you graduate, we're cool with it. Carolina, WSSU, NC, CU, and UNC-G had that class thing where I told you they do it in the summer. They used to have it where it was like one class in the spring and one class in the fall, which was like a whole year wasted for me. So I was like, I can't do that, it's too much time. But Duke was the only one that let me apply before that stuff. So I was like, well, I'll shoot my application over. If I get in, great. If not, I'll just send my application to like all those other schools after. And I got in, and I was at the point where I knew what I wanted to do, so I didn't really want to waste time. So I jumped on it. But now I know UNC does a twice-a-year admission, in the fall and in the spring. And then UNC-G does a fall and the spring admission. And I think NCCU Central in Durham, I want to say they're once a year.
I think A&T is too.
And A&T now does. But I think they're once a year too. And then Winston-Salem State is once a year. And they are 12 months. So you start in January of a year and you graduate by December. So there's no time wasted there.
I've heard that they're gonna stop, continuing with the 12-month programs. Because I was looking at some and I asked my roommate whose sister's a nurse in New York, and she was saying, cause it's in Drexel, the school I was looking at, and I was asking her, I mean, the 16-month is already so accelerated, so how would the 12-month be? And she said it's really, really hard, really, really time consuming, but she said that a lot of places were stopping that.
WSSU is the only one I can think of that has a 12-month program, and they don't follow traditional semesters. So that's kind of how they get around it. Another one I thought of that someone I worked with at Chapel Hill did Western Carolina. And it's actually in Asheville, so a much more exciting place to live than Chloe. So that's always a thing. And
But you don't have time to enjoy it while you're in nursing school.
I mean, you have time, but it's not like
You look out the window.
it's not like undergrad where you have, you know, more time. Yeah, it's definitely selected. Yeah, you can look out the window. Have nice places to eat.
That's right.
That kind of thing. And then I also had I had friends who did a bachelor's and then did an ADN, associate's degree. I personally wouldn't recommend it, just because it's more time. So it's a 2-year program. And then so went to Carolina, did it, and then did an ADN, and it was a 2-year program. Now he's a nurse in Charlotte and having to go back and do a bachelor's of science, like finish his bachelor's of science in nursing. Now Charlotte pays for where he's working, will pay for that BSN portion, and the ADN was cheaper, but you know, he wants to be a nurse practitioner and he knew that, so, but it's gonna delay him. It's gonna take 5 years for the whole process instead of like a year and a half or 2 years. So I mean, you can do it that way. And I'm in school now with several people who were originally ADN prepared and went on. So it's not like it's not frowned upon or looked down upon to do that. And hospitals, every hospital I've worked at, they will hire you as an ADN, but you sign a contingency contract that like within like 3 to 5 years you have to have your bachelor's of science completed or your employment is revoked. But they pay for it, and then people, you know, still work full time and take like a class or 2 at a time. So definitely possible, but it's just a longer way.
Yeah, and a lot of those, what they call RN to BSN programs, which are for those folks, are online. So.
And I know, well, I'm a graduate, well, part of the reason I got UNC-G paper, we spoke about that, I forgot, is I'm a graduate assistant for the undergraduate school of nursing. And so I would specifically work with the director of the RN to BSN program, and I know that UNC-G offers it like at local community colleges across North Carolina. So like if you lived in more of a rural area, we have one at your community college local to you. So you can just go there and take the class. And then there's a lot of them are just online, but some people just aren't online learners either, so there's a lot of options.
You said that when every semester you were at Duke that y'all took a graduate course. Why did y'all take a graduate course in undergraduate?
Yep, so
BSN program?
Duke's whole emphasis in nursing is to be like, they want to produce next generation nursing leaders. And so they want to push you to further your education. So whether that is a master's in education, a master's in leadership, administration, a DNP, whatever it is, they want you to go on. They don't want you to settle at the BSN line. So that I think has a lot to do with it. So that was a challenge. That definitely prepared me for like when I did go back to graduate school. And Duke is definitely set up, and I can't speak to like the other schools because I didn't go there, but they're definitely set up like a graduate school program in the ABSN. Like you are considered a graduate student in their program. And they treat you like one. And then it's a very similar setup like as to what I have now. Like you have a class 1 day to 2 days a week, and you're in class from like 8 to 5. And you have like an hour lunch break. So definitely like intense class days. But I know that's also true for my other friends that are in graduate programs. Like it's your job to be in school. But the way for nursing and nurse practitioner works is they want you to continue to be at the bedside, to continue to build your skills. And you can't apply to be a nurse practitioner until you've been at the bedside. Like you can't even turn in an application until you've had a year of experience at the bedside. So by the time you start, you'll have 2 years of experience at the bedside. So that answers your question.
And you can apply if you had continued in graduate school at Duke. those courses would count towards your graduate program.
So I had a lot of people, so I did apply there, because you have to have letters of recommendation. And so I had to reach out to a lot of my professors. And so I applied there, I applied to Carolina, and I applied to UNC-G. And if I'd gone to Duke, they would have taken every single one of those 4 classes, no questions asked. And it would have cut off like a semester of what I'd have to do. But it was also gonna cost me $120,000. I said no thanks. There were much cheaper options. So for me, when I chose graduate school, it was more of like, what is the most affordable option to get where I'm going? Because once you've got the training, the name of the school doesn't really matter. Especially once you've got some experience under your belt. It's more of like what you do and what you've done. So I definitely encourage, like, if you're looking to get back to school, I think you said you wanted to be a midwife, so getting involved in like your community is a big part of that. Getting involved on your unit, being a leader, showing that like you take the initiative to take the next step, and like you're gonna constantly, so like for a DNP, they want to see that you're going to be like a change agent in your community. You're going to look for ways to like improve practice, improve care of your patients, and you're constantly like trying to make your patients better. And so UNC-G just came back to me with all scholarship money, and everything was like much cheaper. And then by the second year, I had it all paid for. So for me, it was a financial choice because that's what mattered more to me. I felt like I could buy a house with the Duke tuition, and I didn't think I was worth it. So just finding like what matters to you and that you can get what you want. I had also looked at the curriculums of the program, and I know that UNC, with the DNP, you have to do a capstone project. And at Duke and Carolina, you are said, okay, come in the first day, you're gonna graduate in 3 years, pick a project, find your mentor, find your site, and it's all on you to like make the initiative. And I was like, I'm not that kind of, like, I'm not that, like, if you tell me to do something in 3 years, okay, well, I might think about it in like a year and a half, like that's a long time away. And so I knew that that wasn't gonna work for my learning style. And so UNC-G offers where like we started it the first semester of the second year, and you do like an IRB one semester, you do this the next semester. So you're like building
It's more
on
structured.
it. It's structured. It's like, this is what you need to do. And like, I'd never done a doctorate project, so like, how the heck was I supposed to know what to do like every semester? So that made more sense. And they also choose your clinical sites. So that was a big part of when I chose undergrad nursing, looking at like how many hours I was gonna get with my hands on a patient. Because that's when you're gonna really figure out how to do your skills and how to be a nurse. And so just paying attention that you get to spend a lot of time with patients is important too, because that's where you're gonna learn the most. And there's usually like, if you do so like if you did like a UNC-G like traditional program, they make you do like an externship between junior and senior year, and that's when you work kind of as like a nurse assistant / CNA with a unit in the hospital, and you get to apply and like choose something you're interested in. So that would be a chance too to like every clinical experience you do, and this applies to like everyone, is a job opportunity. Like that's a job interview for like 3 to 6 months, and that's your chance to make yourself stand out and all of that stuff. So I know several friends who went to PT school and got offered a job somewhere they had done a clinical rotation in year 2, and they just kept in contact, and they happened to be hiring when they were getting out of school. So just keeping that in mind is like, you always want to represent yourself the best, because you don't know who's gonna have job openings when you're applying, and people are paying attention.
Well, I'm sure that Meredith will be willing to hang around for a couple minutes and answer some questions if you have them
Yeah,
one-on-one. And you were gonna, you can erase some of this physics and you can put your email up there if you want.
And I'll put my email up here, so like any of you who are interested in going to nursing school, if you have questions, you can shoot me an email anytime. No big deal. And if you're not going to nursing school and you just have questions, that's fine.
All right, let's take a second to thank Meredith for coming tonight. and look for a message from me about what's going on next week. Okay, I'll leave it a mystery right now.